where we speak African languages in thought, work, and life. This is a seminar at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies conducted by Professor John M. Ngũgĩ in the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard University on his visit scheduled for June and July 2025. The contents of the discussion and the seminar that is being recorded here includes the introduction of the seminar, African language programs, a discussion of what they are like and what are the lead languages. Then there is the Africa's linguistic landscape. We will look at it because it's very critical in understanding the study of Africa, looking at Africa itself. We will also just very briefly touch on what language is. And then we'll talk about empires of the mind, all related to languages. And then we'll look at the Asmara Declaration as we conclude the seminar that I'm recording here. So the introduction to Africa's landscape. How many languages are acquired, taught, and learned in the African context? Language is equivalent to people. There is an equal sign between people and languages. We are in fact humans by a very clear distinction of language, which is not shared by any other species except the human species. Emphasis on human agency and presence is something that we consider important, and also dealing with the speaker's real contexts where they are. The third point is languages are important in the ways we deal with this world in terms of the literal spaces that we occupy. And these include classrooms, hospitals, homes, and also beyond the very where questions, we also have the symbolic ones about identity, politics, cultural memory, and so on. All these are expressed in language. Resistance and affirmation is the fourth point. This is certainly challenging the marginalization of African languages by asserting that we do not learn them, speak them, and where it matters. That we do learn them, speak them, and that it matters that we do that. The arena we are thinking about is, first of all, begins with thought. And thought is about African languages in philosophy, education, and academic disciplines. We will generalize it later and just say it is African languages in the disciplines and the professions. Indigenous knowledge systems, this is still part of thought, that languages are critical in thought, in actualizing thought and externalizing thought as after it's being delivered to others. Indigenous knowledge systems and African linguistic epistemologies are all delivered by language. So language is critical in that sense. And also there is this issue of decolonizing the mind that is very much propounded and was started by Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, the famous writer from Kenya, about the language and decolonization of thought, that it's actually critical. You can't decolonize yourself with a foreign language. That would be a misnomer in our voice. And then there is, after thought, there is work. Work to be done. The work that is done with languages, language policy and professional language use in courts, in healthcare, in technology. Work that involves the economics of language, translation, interpretation, multilingual workplaces are all part of this language effort and delivered by language. Challenges in standardization, terminology, and training. These are some of the other things that language has to face and be able to navigate through. Then there is life, everyday life, communication, marketplace sorts of things where people meet for various engagements, households, storytelling time, social media, and also language and identity formation. And of course, the idea of intergenerational transmission information that is accrued from experience and history. And there is also the creative expression that is part of life that brings about the idea of music, film, and literature. All these are significantly influential in part of the work we are doing in this very preliminary introduction. I teach at Harvard University, and over the last couple of decades, I have been leading the African language program. Here is a story about it. Harvard's African Language Program, ALP, has become the preeminent instructional endeavor, experiencing steady growth since its inception in 2003. Immense thanks to the dedicated instructors, teaching assistants, teaching fellows, and preceptors. The ALP ventures beyond the borders of a typical African language program, offering instruction and creating resources for not only indigenous African languages, but also in African pidgins and creoles, including Sierra Leonean Creole, Cameroonian Pidgin, and West African Pidgin English, as well as the languages of the Black diaspora, including Gala Geechee, Jamaican Patois, and Haitian Creole. During a typical week, there are approximately 20 different African languages taught on Harvard's campus. This not only makes Harvard one of the most Afrophonic spots on earth, but also makes the ALP a truly global undertaking dedicated to the promotion of Africana ways of knowing, speaking, and communicating. Yes, that's the African language program described. Africa is a vast and dynamic continent. It's richly endowed with natural landscapes, forests, hills, valleys, and abundant biodiversity. It also has a deep reservoir of human creativity, culture, belief systems, and intellectual traditions. It is home to over 1.4 billion people, with a rapidly growing and overwhelmingly youthful population. In countries like Kenya and Tanzania, the average age hovers around 20 years. And the demographic energy is mirrored in the continent's cultural and linguistic diversity. Africa hosts more than 2,000 languages, making it the most multilingual region on Earth. At the Harvard University's African language program, this particular diagram is here showing the work that we've been able to do in the institution. And in the last 20 years, we've taught 47 languages, as you can see on this. And these languages are defined in various language families of Africa and Black languages. And we have taught languages that have had big numbers, like Zulu. We have 966 people thus far. Swahili 1,147. Then we have others with medium ranges in the several hundreds, and some have only one or two students. So we have taught Rutoro and Sesotho to one person. Well, normally these single-digit people are basically graduate students who are doing research and finally graduate, and a lot of them are actually now already professors and working in other places. The importance of this is to just show that yes, we have taught all these languages, and you can see that this is now at the spring of 2025, which is a current semester. So this is very much up to date. And we've taught all ranges of languages that cut across the place. We are going to see their outline, and also we are going to define them slowly as we move along with this particular discussion. The way we have had them is that we began at a very low pace. We had 44 students the first time we started this in 2003, and they steadily grew from 44 to 95. This is fall and spring, so this is 95 in 1 year, 68 in one semester, 68 in another, and so on. And they kept on growing, so that we have had the blue line represents a fall, the green line represents a spring, and this represents a total. The brown represents a total. And we can see that at the height of the language program, this was just before COVID era, we had reached place of 500 to many other hundreds and all the way to the very end. So it has been a very good enterprise. We have had results and students have been learning a lot of these languages. The distribution of them, and this is important because again, they look like there are many, but we have 2,000 languages. We said we have 1/3 of Africa's of the world's languages in Africa, but this is the largest picture we've seen anywhere in this world, and so the languages we've taught have been Khmer. These are the ones that are in the single digits, and then they keep climbing as we teach the larger versions of them. So this is just to give an example of languages offered by enrollment of the languages themselves. And these are the top, would be the top dozen or so languages that have been the most taught. So we have Swahili, Yoruba, Wolof, Chui, Zulu, Hausa, Amharic, Somali, Kikuyu. These are actually found in all the 4 language families of Africa. So it is a serious enterprise dealing with this. And of course, the way the chart has gone is that we started low and we have now come all the way to the top here. And because of the changes due to COVID seasons and all the stuff we had, we did not have as high numbers, and now they're seeming to be stabilizing. This is just another example again of showing what countries do we have the students in from, what are they studying. They're not normally from there, they're just studying the languages, although many are heritage students, so they have been attending courses that maybe their family lines have spoken in the past when they're in Africa. And this is just showing 50% of the languages you teach are from 23 African countries. So Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Senegal, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, all the way to Madagascar, which is at the bottom. But it's still the 23, so there are many others that are not represented in this chart. It is good to see those numbers so that then when we move to looking at what is actually happening around the world with African languages, we can note the kinds of efforts that there are for getting African languages where they're supposed to be. I should hasten now, as before I go to the next chart, or even when I'm staying in this chart here, that it is important to realize that African languages are not learned because they are there to be just taught, and that they are just about somehow some good gesture that they included. It is where they are taught according to at least Harvard's African language program. The faculty said it is actually incumbent upon anybody who studies Africa to be able to study African languages and to actually be able to use them, have proficiency in them. And so the enterprise is a big one, and people do take these classes for several years down the road, and we've seen very good results, because it is very awkward for somebody to go and talk about Africa and their research, and then we discover somehow along the way that they actually don't know how to speak the language, any language at all, of the people that were researching. They have just come up with translators who have translated for them. The table that you see here is a table that shows some of the top institutions that actually teach African languages in the US. It is a big enterprise in America, but it is concentrated only in a few places. So we have the big places that teach them according to the various things, places I've looked at. Looks like these would be the big institutions. So we have Harvard University, Michigan State University, Boston, Stanford, University of Florida, Howard, and University of Wisconsin, Yale University, UCLA, UC Berkeley, and Rutgers University. And you can see that apart from Harvard University, which is teaching 12 to 24 every semester, and Michigan State that supports up to 32, meaning that they actually teach 9 to 12 languages according to their records annually, and therefore they have a big, vibrant, thriving center. And it is to be realized that out of all these languages that we have here, the only program that is teaching languages that are of the African diaspora, meaning not in Africa but of Black people outside in the diaspora, we do teach them at Harvard, and those languages are Gala, Haitian, and Jamaican. And so most language programs will have 8 languages, and these are the places that are called the national resource centers. They are very serious. They are very serious programs making and using these languages and teaching them for their students, and the students in turn become experts in various things using these languages. So this is not just learning them for theory; it's learning them for proficiency and use. And so the picture is, out of the several hundred languages we have, we do have this kind of picture, and many of them they repeat. So these are not different languages. It looks like we all do Swahili, Chui, Yoruba, Amharic, and Igbo are quite present, and you see that the list repeats itself. There is reason to point out at all these things when we come to discussions about the state of Africa's languages in intellectual production and in professional work praxis. It's a good point to actually see the very vibrancy of what we may say is actually a thriving program. But there are a few languages that are taught. That's the main point that we get out of that. So at this point then, one has to begin as though one doesn't know anything, and therefore one has to look at Africa's linguistic landscape. It is good for one to look at it and see what it looks like. So usually, if you're in my class, I would actually be able to give quizzes on the language map. Not that I want to see that you memorize them, but it's the idea that you can identify where they are. One of the big things about studying Africa is to make sure that when you meet Africans, they will know you authentically informed. And if you're not, then you can ask. But it is good to know names of countries. There is all the countries that we have there by name, and even capital cities of them, just to be sure. And of course, you can always ask the phone. You can always go to the iPhone and actually ask what is the country, what is Zambia's capital, and all those other things. But it is good to know, because once you know these things, when you meet somebody and they tell you they're from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and all of a sudden you really don't seem to even know that it existed, then it's another matter. Though nobody frowns about it, but it is good to see that there are these many countries and languages. Number one is about countries and their names of these languages, their names of these countries, and so on. We'll talk about that too. That names of countries don't necessarily reflect the wishes of the people who live there. Some of them were imposed, and some of them have even tried to change their names once in a while. And therefore, Africa has this diversity of languages, mainly because of colonialism that came and disturbed the ecosystem, and everybody decided to say they have carved a country out of the place. And therefore, there is a very big debate on whether Africa is a continent or is a country, or it is countries. And Africans that have met, who are elderly and all the other stuff, they don't consider Africa to be a place of countries. It is a country. I have been to many countries in Africa, and when we arrive there, every elder who comes from another country just asks the people, greets them and says, how is our land of Mali doing? How is our land of Zambia doing? How is our land of Angola doing? And therefore, we have not bought into the idea that this is one place, because we have not bought into the idea that this is a place that is actually multiple places because of governments. But we think before colonialism, there was the idea that, yes, we knew people and where they lived, and we assumed that those were their quarters, and we didn't consider it to be a foreign country. But then politics have, of course, a reason to say that, but that's languages. I mean, that's country names and people. Then we come to languages, which I'm anticipating even saying before I turn here. But one thing is that then, after knowing the names of the countries, at least try to know at least 2 or 3 languages. In this map, we have there is actually put 3 of them. So to know 3 languages in a country would be wonderful. Normally, people go for the big ones. Most of the ones named in this map right now are actually the big languages. But there is a way of getting also to know the smaller ones that are in this country. So in Rwanda, for instance, is Kinyarwanda and Hima and Swahili. Rwanda doesn't have many languages. It has actually just those. Swahili, Gogo, and Sukuma, the ones identified in Tanzania. Tanzania has a lot of these languages, and so on and so forth. I know these maps. It is good to know some of these names of languages, names of places, and names of languages that are spoken there. So the most linguistically diverse African countries, I'll just mention them here briefly. The most linguistically diverse is Nigeria with 400 people, 400 languages, sorry, not people, 400 languages. They're quite up there in some, the population has always been at least in the upper, over 100 million people. But Cameroon has 300. Cameroon is just a neighbor to Nigeria. They share borders. Congo has 210, and by Congo we mean the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also called Zaire in the past. And Tanzania follows with 120. These are the big language countries, with many languages. And then we have Ethiopia at 100. Different languages, and also Chad, the same thing. These we would call them the most linguistically diverse, because what it means is that of all these languages, if Nigeria says they have 400 languages there, there are so many dialects that surround the place that actually the number does kind of become large. And so the least linguistically diverse compared to the most diverse, basically Burundi, Rwanda, Swaziland, Djibouti, Lesotho, and Somalia. These places can do very well. They don't have questions about what language do they use do they use in schools? What kind of language difficulties do they have? Because they have most of the people there speak the one language or the two that are there. That's a very different kind of experience in Africa when you live in other countries. After looking at those, then there is this idea of the language families of Africa. This is what this map shows. And it is important to know that this blue part, this is all Afro-Asiatic, and it all joins arms with Middle East countries across across from Africa. And here we have the yellow countries. Those are the Nilotic. These would be involving the Nilotics, involves Maasai, Luo, Kalenjin, and other languages that are in that region. Also, the other many languages in South Sudan, and all the way to all these parts. And then the red part is showing the Niger Congo, part A, this Niger Congo that is in West Africa. And there is then the Bantu languages are these particular expanse from the waist of Africa all the way to the toes. And the green parts are basically the Khoisan and the Creek languages to hear about. Africa is never complete without, Madagascar and or Malagasy, where they speak Malagasy, and this is an Austronesian language. The green here, you would see that there is a little green in Tanzania. This is one of the some of the Click languages, as well as these parts. The oldest one among all of them is Swahili, is the one in Tanzania, and that shows that once upon a time, this green was occupying this whole place. These people have been pushed away by other populations. And so we do have those. And then there is, of course, the Indo-European language, Afrikaans, whose history is well known. So we do have Afro-Asiatic as a language. We have Nilo-Saharan. We have Niger-Congo. We have Khoisan. And we have seen Niger-Congo has 1,436 languages, Nilo-Saharan 196, and Khoisan 35, and these are the numbers. And Afro-Asiatic has 371, which brings us to the idea of close to 2,000. So Africa is home to 2,000 languages, roughly 1/3 of all the languages spoken. And this is a summary of what we just said, that these are the language families of Africa, and there is no other place that is more linguistically diverse. Of the languages that are diverse, this particular image is showing the waistline down of Africa, where the Bantu languages concentrate. And the Bantu languages are the biggest subphylum of any language family in the world. There is about 500 of these Bantu languages, and they're famous for having tones. They are famous for being languages that literally spread out from West Africa, maybe the Niger Delta, and moved to these other parts in the last several hundred years. And so some of the names that are very much familiar, it would be Swahili is here. We do have the Makua, we do have the Zulu, the Tswana, the Herero. All these languages, a person who speaks any of the Bantu languages, it is said, should be able to get to a new place and stay there for 2 weeks. And after staying for 2 weeks, you figure out what everybody's trying to say or saying, and then they can move to the next village. And one may be able to move across the waste of it, speaking a different language that they keep changing. And sometimes it's a very interesting experience. Since I speak the languages, it's been fun just getting to see the kinds of connections they have and similarities and the unsurprising differences. So then there is the idea of the primary subgroups and secondary subgroups and tertiary subgroups. Those are different classifications of belonging and connect, and the idea of being in close proximity in terms of their linguistics more than anything else. Beyond then, those we do have these other languages that we have here, and these are the, again, it's showing the same kind of image that we were seeing before, where it is showing the different kind of languages that we have, only that this it is now trying to write some of the big languages there, and it has a pretty good representation of them. Pidgins are the other class of languages that are unrelated to the other languages that are said to be in places, and they have a geographical expanse from the deep past. Apologize for that noise. From the deep past, they have had connections with other languages. So these are the languages that are formed by having a language meeting some other language that is normally a trade language, and then you have these pidgins and creoles produced. Pidgins then are languages that are spoken by people who will meet, and as they communicate, they are using different languages you don't understand. None can speak the others directly, so it becomes something that grows. And Swahili pidgins are known, Congo pidgins are there, Zambian pidgins, Fanakalo, you have Afrikaans, and so on. And these are easy to find if one looks into YouTube and finds some of them. You can hear the speech. In East Africa, we have one called Sheng, and it's wonderful. And we have the West African pidgin that percolates this whole area, and it is spoken in variously. They are not all identical pidgin Englishes over there. There are many Englishes. And And so it is a rich thing to know, because though they seem to have intruded into the numbers of the languages being spoken in Africa, they are the bridge languages, so that a lot of these then have become powerful, they've become strong, and even when they're pidgins, and they soon enough develop more and more systems and become creoles, and then they just become part of the language. A lot of languages are formed that way. So filler by country would be, and these I'll just now rush through. We have Niger-Congo languages, which are 40 of them from the groups that we had. So you can actually see from Angola to Zimbabwe, all these are going to be Niger-Congo, and there are 40 of them. They're out of those countries. These, we are not talking about number of languages, these are countries. 40 countries in Africa, as you know, they are in Niger-Congo countries. And then Afro-Asiatic countries, countries are basically the ones that are listed here. You have, I see Afro-Asiatic languages, even though Afghanistan is written, it doesn't belong, but there is Algeria, Cameroon, Chad, Mauritania, Mali, all these places, all the way to Tanzania and Arab Emirates and so on. They are all put in there as a large group. That's 33 Afro-Asiatic languages. Nilo-Saharan are 15, and we say those belong to Algeria, Benin, Burkina Faso, and all the way to Democratic Republic of the Congo, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and so on. And then we have the Khoisan. The Khoisan are 5 countries that actually speak these languages, and normally these are concentrated on Angola, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Tanzania. Tanzania has the oldest among them, and that shows that they were themselves part of a larger group that then moved away and split up. And those people can still be seen in Tanzania today on YouTube. If you just look for the click language of in Tanzania, you're going to see them. So then there are trans-territorial languages. So this now allows us to start thinking about how one can get through Africa. So the trans-territorial languages, the languages that you can find in more than one country. There is these languages, 5 of, you know, they are creoles that can actually be found in 5 countries. Ewe can be found in 3, Fang in 4, Fulani spoken in very many places. It's the most widely distributed language in Africa. 14 within 14 countries. That's quite remarkable. Hausa is in 7. Kanuri is in 4. That is also, all these are in West Africa. And Lingala is in Central Africa. It's got 2 places, it's 2 countries it has, and Mandinka. These are then core languages. There are lots of them. The Bamanakan, the Madingo, and all those others are in that group. Setswana, there is in 3 countries. Somali is in 4. Assuming Somali will be in Kenya, Tanzania, and of course Somali, and even Ethiopia. Songhai will be there. Soninke, these are West African. Swahili is in 10 countries. Although now it's being taught in a lot of places, but it is really the one that is pursuing the record of Fulani. And so this is a distribution. Tamashek is a language that is in the northern Africa and in the desert. And there is Wolof in Senegal, and Yoruba in Nigeria and other places. Then we have dominant languages. These are the languages that are spoken. They're the kings of their countries, because if 99% of people speak Kirundi, then there is not much to worry about, other than just to take care of the 1 or 2 who are not doing it. And then, so all these Sutu, Tswana, Kinyarwanda, Creole, and Swati are all in that category of languages that are very dominant. Languages spoken by less than 90% of the population. Well, Burkina Faso, you have Moor, Sango, Fang, Wolof in Gambia, and Akan in Ghana. Malawi, there is Chichewa, and Mali has Bamanakan. Mauritania, Arabic, Niger, Hausa, Senegal, Wolof, Tanzania, Swahili, and Zimbabwe has Shona. More than one dominant country languages. Then you have Umbudu in Angola, Kikongo, Lingala, Kikongo in DRC. Ethiopia has Amharic, Tigrinya, Oromo. Guinea, Fulani, Malinke, Sutsu, and you can see all this. Kenya has Swahili, Gikuyu, and Luo as more than one dominant languages that are there, and Nigeria has Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Arabic and Dinka in southern Sudan. Zambia has Bemba, Nyanja, and Tonga. Now here we have defined then the languages that are big, the languages that are in big geographical expanses, and see then that the source of the populations you can see in the percentages underneath here. This is just for Kenya. Kikuyu is 22%, the other language is 14%. So here nobody really has the win of the dominance of the country, because the populations are quite close to each other, except of course there are lots of others, because Kenya has at least 42 languages, and therefore there is a lot of distribution. Countries with several large but non-dominant languages. This is have just many languages that are big, yet they are not dominant. So you have Benin has Fon, Gan, Aja, Yoruba, Bariba, Cameroon, Jula, Pidgin, Gulu, Gbaya, Fulani. Cote d'Ivoire has Nyi, Baule, Jula, Senufo, and so on, as these ones that are listed there, with Sierra Leone, Creole, Mende, Temne, Kpele, and Limba. So African languages with more than 1 million speakers is important, because there is 8 languages have 10 million speakers, 10 million plus speakers in Africa. These may be a bit dated because right now we are at 1 point something billion, 1.4, 1.5 billion. So, but these then 12 languages are spoken, have people who are about 5 to 10 million speakers. 8 languages have 4 to 5 million speakers. 12 languages, 3 to 4 million speakers. And 18, 2 to 3 million speakers. That means for every one of them, there is 2 to 3 million people. And then 18 languages to those who are just between 1 million and 2 million. And so these populations then would actually indicate that when we look at them and we counted them, these would be 20, that's 40 plus 36. We just have about 76 languages. And that's instructive, because if you have 76 languages out of the 2,000, out of the 1,500 languages or the 2,000 languages, then it means the diversity is actually really, we have a lot of small languages. And that's why, they're saying that 97% of Africa's languages, or of the world's languages, in fact, 97% are spoken by 3% of the people in the places, because the other large languages have grown too large and people have walked away from the others. There is a statistic like that, which shows basically that these big languages, as they keep growing, the small ones are disappearing. That's the whole issue there. So what is language? I want to define language because we know it is what we use to speak to each other and do other things, but language, we should think of it as for our purposes in this seminar, it is to talk about it as people, or a person and people. A person, that is a person who is living, and then a person does not become a person unless there is another person. So this is people. And the question there important is that who is the question. Who is there? It's people, and therefore you have that that language is there. Another aspect of language is that language can be an individual that one sees, and they can do certain things, but it's not complete if there is no sign or sound. In other words, we have to have a language that is being spoken or signed Otherwise, then we have a different kind of thing. And of course, there are people without both, and that's a pretty difficult way to exist. But some find ways of navigating the situation. But this is, so sign is another definition of language. So that when we asked what is language, the language has to have a person. It has to have not just sound that you can talk to somebody, but also be able to sign, because there is more than one way to actually communicate language, and that language doesn't have necessarily to be audible. It can be visual, it can be other things. And that requires, then it tells us that language is really about interpersonal engagement. So people, interpersonal engagement through sound and sign. And then there is this thing we call culture, which then shows their living, their understanding of their environments, and I mean their culture, what they have, how they have managed to eke out a living and live the way they are with each other, and looking through communities and other things. So then the other part of language as a definition is the environment. So the environment is important in terms of where. So we have in what is language, we have to actually be saying who, what, how, and where, are at least the basic questions we have to ask whenever we encounter this question of language. And so if the environment is part of it, since we have persons, we have sign and sound, we have culture, and we have environment, the environment is really about looking at the places that even in fact produce languages, because anytime there is a divide between communities, languages also tend to be different, or often are different, especially when people do not travel too much. And so this being the definition of language, then I would like to define what Swahili is. And this is a definition that comes from Swahili that I'm trying to use, which is, so Swahili is considered, so when you are Swahili, and when you're those 500 Bantu languages, if you're a person, then you have to have the wa, or ba, va, and so on, which is indicating people. So, and this one is saying who is Swahili, or Swahili is, you have to begin with the and then you end up with the word Swahili in it. Then there is also Ki. So when you move from Swahili, wa Swahili, you go to Kiswahili. Kiswahili is the language, and Kiswahili is really language and the manner of doing things. So if you're doing things in a Swahili manner, or if you make your pies, if you bake your pies in the American way, or in the Japanese way, then we actually say that is Ki-Japan. We can say Ki-Marekani. We can say Ki-China. That is just meaning in what is actually the manner, the styles, the language of the people. And so every time you hear somebody's language, you're told Italian, then you say Chi Italiano, and so on. And so then the other component, after you have the person and the language itself, and the language and the manners, then you have the idea of culture itself. So what is Swahili? It is tradition, it is culture, it is philosophies, it's religions, it is all those things that make somebody or make people have these cultures. And then language, now here we are saying Swahili, then Swahili is got two things. It takes Uswahili, which is about culture and tradition, and adds NI at the end, and that NI always symbolizes location. So if you say Swahili, then you say Uswahilini. That means Swahili is language. Uswahili is being the idea of being a Swahili person. And then you say Uswahilini, that's where you expect to find the Swahilis themselves. So and so everybody then becomes like that. So if you come from Japan, then we say unatoka Ujapan, because then we would use you as that, and then but if we say England, we would actually say Uingereza, but then we want to say if if we want to say the place, then it is Uingerezani, which would actually put an N at the end. The idea here is then that it is about the place one lives, the land, and all those other things, just like Ali Mazrui said that geography is the mother of history. That remains contested because one has to know that yes, geography and I think there is a good interplay between humans and these environments. So the definition of language and is this thing. So when we say, is somebody speaking a language, it is not enough for somebody to say they speak a language because they know how to greet and do little things, but it is that they can understand and be understood, and also be able to actually be able to know the cultures of the place, and then also to know that means the interpretive lens is what would be that you have the ability to discern things and interpret them and so on, and understand them and be able to negotiate. And then, of course, there's land and environment. So the empires of the world, then, and now I'll go faster. This kingdom or the empire of the world is a concept that was introduced right at Harvard University by none other than Winston Churchill. And I want you to meet Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of England during the Second World War, and also Gordon Brown, a more recent Prime Minister of England, and what they said. Winston Churchill said that the power to control language offers far better prizes than taking away people's provinces or lands, or grinding them down in exploitation. The empires of the future, said this man, the empires of the future, Winston Churchill said, are the empires of the mind. And so that's critical. I need us to remember it as we get through the seminar, that we can actually discuss what that is all about. Instead of grinding people with exploitation, you have to just, it is the language, it is the empires of the future will be the mind. And therefore, what does that mean? And that was done at Harvard, where Winston Churchill received an honorary degree on 6th September 1943. Then there is Gordon Brown. He has this to say.
Like football and so many sports, English began in Britain, but now belongs to the world. It's spoken by more than 1 billion people. It's the language of the internet, and it's the language of business, and it transcends borders, cultures, and divides, helping us not just to understand each other better, but to foster mutual respect. In total, 2 billion people worldwide will be learning English by 2020, but there are millions more on every continent who are still denied the chance to learn English. So today I want Britain to make a new gift to the world, a commitment to help anyone, however impoverished, however far away, to access the tools they need to learn English. And this week I'll use my visit to China and India to begin to make a reality of this new commitment. First, I'll announce that the British Council, working with partners from both public and private sectors, will set up a new website offering learners and teachers of English around the world ready access to the materials, resources, and qualifications they need to develop the skills. And this new site will enable one-to-one tuition to take place in any part of the world. It will put English teachers and learners in touch with their counterparts in Britain and across the globe. And second, to transform English language teaching, we will need to dramatically increase the number and quality of teachers. So I'll announce in India later this week a new British Council programme to recruit master trainers who will train 750,000 teachers of English in India over the next 5 years. And we'll use the latest technologies and new public-private partnerships to make dynamic English learning, teaching and practice materials available to vast new audiences. In this way, with more teachers, more courses, more websites, and new media channels, we will open up English to new countries and to new generations. Britain taking up the bold task of making English accessible right across the globe.
Yes, that is the Minister Gordon Brown, Minister of England, British Prime Minister, on English. So what do you think about those statements? We can probably discuss them when we get together. Now, there are some things about the presence of English, and that's why I bring it here, in terms of the way Africa is. And look at this. These are incongruities that exist. Consider the following, and use how language is used and so on, and realize what the situation of language is like. So here we have the equal sign not is actually saying it's either not equal or even very seldom is. So the language of local knowledge, meaning the language, if you speak Maasai, that's a local of indigenous knowledge. And then there is a language of education, which is different. So there is a disconnect between the language, the first language, and the language that is actually of the school. The language of the home usually is indigenous, meaning one of the 2,000, whatever number we had over there, and then it is period, and then everything is instruction is being done in English. And so the story goes, the language of the child is not the language of the textbook, which is English. The language of daily life is indigenous, but the language of the textbook is English. The language of play is indigenous. The language of learning is English. One can already almost start to sympathize with the Prime Minister of England, but not quite that fast. So the language of acquisition, that is a child's own language, that all of us learn as children without even knowing we are learning it, is not the same as the language of the school. And the language of comprehension, which is indigenous, is not the language of exams, which are in English. I must say, language of exams is an interesting point because in situations like where I grew up in Kenya and other places, if you got all A's in all the big subjects and failed in the essay writing that asked you about what you did on a weekend and what was fun about it, and you couldn't write, you didn't go to the university. One of the most worst atrocities of working with, of neglecting people who are very, very smart but couldn't speak English. It is a big deal. It was a big deal, and now, of course, people are becoming more and more proficient, and therefore, in English, therefore, it doesn't look like it's going to fail. But there is this idea of the indigenous versus the language of the issues that are actually out there. And you can tell that even the language of the teacher is indigenous and the language of instruction. So it is very well known in Africa and other places in the world that there are teachers who are known that they can speak only certain ways. They themselves can't even pass the language exam, the English language exam. So we end up with all these other things. And therefore there is a disconnect. And maybe it is a solution where there was no other possibility. But the languages of survival are indigenous, but the language of education is not that of survival. It is one of going through school, and it brings about another kind of thing. Now, those incongruities are basically saying the big advantages are on the right side. The languages you're born with are on the left side. So what elite families do then is to decide to just forget the indigenous and go for the other languages, since they seem to get people advantages in life, in jobs and other places. The incongruities continue. Here, Swahili is rarely the language used in parliament, but here I'm talking about jurisprudence, because jurisprudence has more meaning than just the idea that a child went to school. Jurisprudence means that's where the laws are being handled and cases being decided. And of course, it's one of the places of that bring about incarceration. So if the language of law enforcement is not the language of jurisprudence, then the litigants, especially the ones who are in the court for a case, are not able to hear some of these things. And the language of the rural land disputes, the rural land disputes are done in the indigenous languages, but the language of the law courts is English. That becomes something else. And this is basically generally the uniform story of all African languages that actually use these languages. The language of law enforcement, which is Swahili in Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, is not the language of the majority of the population. The language of constitution, which is English, is not the language of proficiency for the vast majority. It's not the language they can actually defend themselves in court. In fact, there is a very big thing that is always in Kenya's courts, that if cases go through and all the if a litigant ended up saying they didn't understand what they were being charged with, or if if they have any issues and if they reveal they don't know English, then the case is either repeated or was postponed or other things. So it's not a small deal. And then there is the language of governance, which is English is the only way that one can actually get in the higher ups in these places, maybe for being in governance. And the language of the majority of citizens is Indigenous. The language of parliament is fortunately English and Swahili, so Swahili is included, but the language of the average citizen is Indigenous. Countries like Tanzania have done quite well. They are pretty good in Swahili, and therefore they do that kind of thing. But even there is still the subterranean question to ask. 120 languages belong to the place. And we are told that everybody is actually just speaking Swahili nicely and all the other. But when you go listening and when you go hearing, it is not actually as it is said to be. There is definitely real issues with other languages. People who can't speak really great Swahili. The language of the ballot, which is English and Swahili, is not the language of the voter. Now, of course, that is self-explanatory, and the language of power definitely is not the language of proficiency for most Kenyans and other people in the continent, Tanzania, Nigeria, other places. And so here then, let us now turn to the Asmara Declaration. The Asmara Declaration is titled the Asmara Conference in Eritrea, January 11th to the 17th in the year 2000. Let us take a moment and listen to some of the things that were said in that conference as we proceed.
Such Africans have great hopes that we'll be able to conquer them always against all odds.
These are languages of expression to us, and African languages are languages of being. So we have to make this distinction. Once we cease to use these languages, it's as if we cease to be. And once we cease to be, who are we?
One of the most important poetry festivals in the world, the Rotterdam Poetry International Festival. That year, the festival organizers decided to focus on Africa. And so many of us, the majority of poets invited were from Africa. We left there fairly embarrassed. Why? Because all our colleagues from all over the world kept asking us one question. And this was the background to the question. There were over 20 African poets. I believe there were almost 30. When any other poet was called upon, the Swedish poet was called upon, naturally, he or she presented her poetry in Swedish. Our Chinese colleague was called upon, naturally, he presented his poetry in Chinese. And it went around the world until it came down to Africa. Our colleague from South Africa was called upon, he presented his poetry in English. Our colleague from Senegal was called upon, he presented his poetry in French. With a singular exception of our brother here, Abdulatif Abdullah, who made a very powerful presentation in Kiswahili. It would appear the question was very obvious. Then everybody kept asking us, don't you have languages in Africa? And I said, of course we do. So why don't you write in your languages? As it turns out, many of us didn't exactly know why. But we left there, at least some of us left there, realizing that, as our brother Ngũgĩ had pointed out earlier, We had been in an extremely abnormal situation, but had grown up thinking that this was what? Absolutely normal.
We now resume from hearing that to the declaration itself and the way people organize themselves. We have just seen a scene in which writers and scholars from all regions of Africa gathered in Asmara, Eritrea, like we had read in January 11th to the 17th in the year 2000 at a conference entitled Against All Odds, African Languages and Literatures into the 21st Century. This is the first conference on African languages and literatures ever to be held on African soil, with participants from East, West, North, Southern Africa, and from the diaspora, and by writers and scholars from around the world. We examined the state of African languages in literature, scholarship, publishing, education, and administration in Africa and throughout the world. We celebrated the vitality of African languages and literatures and affirmed their potential. We noted with pride that despite all the odds against them, African languages as vehicles of communication and knowledge survive and have a written continuity of thousands of years. Colonialism created some of the most serious obstacles against African languages and literatures. We noted with concern the fact that these colonial obstacles still haunt independent Africa, and continue to block the mind of the continent. We identified a profound incongruity. We identified a profound incongruity in colonial languages speaking for the continent. At the start of a new century and millennium, Africa must firmly reject this incongruity and affirm a new beginning by returning to its languages and heritage. Here then is how they stated everything. It says that this historic conference, we writers and scholars of the region, of all regions of Africa gathered in Asmara, Eritrea, declare that 1. African languages must take on the duty and responsibility and the challenge of speaking for the continent. 2. The vitality and equality of African languages must be recognized as a basis for the future empowerment of African peoples. The diversity of African languages reflects the rich cultural heritage of Africa and must be used as an instrument of African unity. Declaration number 4. Dialogue among African languages is essential. African languages must use the instrument of translation to advance communication among all people, including the disabled. Declaration number 5. All African children have the unalienable right to attend school and learn in their mother tongues. Every effort should be made to develop African languages at all levels of education. Promoting research on African languages is vital for the development, while the advancement of African research and documentation will be best served by the use of African languages. That's declaration number 6. Declaration number 7 says that the effect and rapid development of science and technology in Africa, the effective and rapid development of science and technology in Africa depends on the use of African languages, and modern technology must be used. Modern technology must be used for the development of African languages. Declaration 8 says democracy is essential for the equal development of African languages, and African languages are vital for the development of democracy based on equality and social justice. Number 9, Declaration 9, African languages, like all languages, contain gender bias. The role of African languages in development must overcome this gender bias and achieve gender equality. And the 10th and last declaration in this Asmara conference is that African languages are essential for the decolonization of African minds and for the African Renaissance. These are strong statements, and there are many issues we will be discussing through them. What world is being depicted by the same people we've heard saying that whenever they go out, when Africans go out of Africa and present their poetry, our Africans are talking non-African languages, meaning languages of colonialism, and that French, English, especially French and English. And then they come up with these 10, and I would be curious to find out what you think about each one of these, and which ones are puzzling, and why, and what is behind them is one of the things we'll be talking about. There is a reason why these were stated this way in very strong language. So as we continue then, here I would just like to point at these kings of Africa. I don't call them kings because of a label. They indeed are kings in Africa, from various West African countries all the way to the Congo. And they were at a meeting in Yaoundé. This is in Cameroon, where I was attending a conference. And at the conference, I noticed that they were there very well respected. They always stood up to grace the place and even do some of their poetry themselves, but nobody asked them to say anything. Yet everybody who was speaking was always saying these kings of Africa, traditional kings of Africa, have solutions to every problem, literally, on the continent. But I was amazed that none of them was being asked anything. Now, that doesn't mean it's only because maybe they didn't know English or French, but because also as Africans, they were coming there to speak in their own languages, so they ended up being mute the whole time. So I begged for a meeting with them at lunchtime. We were not eating too far away from there, and wanted to discuss with them, and I talked with them. And they were all unanimous in saying that basically it is another language that is being used. People will not benefit from it, so this is just scholarship. And it is actually also not exact scholarship, because a lot of people will be constrained by the kind of English they can command in terms of its power and delivery, that basically it wasn't much. I left there very happy. It is me right here standing. And this was my colleague, Boubacar Jakite from Mali. We both were teaching at Harvard then in the African language program. And these kings variously came from all these countries, and they had committees and meetings and so on. So they were said to be able to even stop difficult things like Boko Haram, and but they were not given near in the conference. I just say that because we've just seen the piece that we just looked at on the declarations. So here we will now look at Ngũgĩ's question. Ngũgĩ Thiong'o. Ngũgĩ Thiong'o is famous as a writer in Africa. I think they're one of the most famous ones and most eloquent and most clear in mind about what it is that he talks about. And he is there quite a bit, and we're going to hear a little bit of him today. And he has asked these questions that would be useful to trigger the kind of discussions we should be having with African languages. And this one, the first one here is, can you or anybody, he was asking in one of his interviews with people online, that can you or anybody else imagine French literature in Zulu, where you say this is French literature, but it is written in Zulu. It's an absolute absurdity, but it is what we normally do. So when somebody says you are talking African literature, but you're speaking it in English, it's quite interesting to think through. Can you think, the second question, can you think of English literature in Chinese where you say we are promoting English literature, but it must be written in Chinese? That's called translation. It's not the literature. And have you ever heard of anyone who got a job as a professor of French who admitted he or she or he, could not speak French? I won't comment on who teaches Africa and whether these conditions can even be met, but these are pertinent questions in the kinds of issues that we are interested in terms of introducing ourselves to Africa's languages and the role that they actually play and their significance. And so here I want to again turn to one of Ngũgĩ Thiong'o's interviews, and it is he's talking about memory. the idea that language is memory, and memory erasure, that is memory out, and memory establishment is something he's explaining very well. And so we should really take a moment to actually listen to how he's explaining it.
Something torn and new, which is basically about the politics of memory. And memory is what makes us who we are. Memories of the past, for instance, is what makes us be able to evaluate the present as we plan for tomorrow. Now, one of the most important of memories is simply the memories of who we are, where we come from, you see our parents or the region in which I was born, the stories I was told, the language I used, as a child, the language of, say, my parents, the language of my community, and so on. And I think what the colonial process does, or any process of domination, is first of all, the erasure of the memory of the subjugated, right? You literally erase the memory of who they are, their memories of the past, the memory of their being, as a people. So after erasing that memory, you plant another memory, the memory of the colonizer or the memory of the one who's dominating. So in that case, the memory of the dominating becomes the beginning of your memory, right? So there's a lot of politics or power politics to do with memory. And you can see this, quite frankly, when we can see this when people have colonized another territory. The first thing you do is change actually the name of the territory they have conquered, or dominated, So for instance, New York becomes not the name of how the place was called by the Native Americans, because there were people before, but called New York in terms of the invading presence, So in America, you had of New England, New Britain, New Haven, New Ark, New everything. And the same, really, whenever one people have conquered another territory, the first thing you do is actually try to plant their memory on the land that they have conquered. First of all, the geography of what they have conquered, first of all, and thereafter on the body and mind of the conquered. Of course, one of the best ways of establish this memory is literally language, right?
You contrast the two terms, dismember and remember.
Yes, because you are dismembering the dominant, particularly in the case of Africa, it's very, very clear that through language, the Africans who are enslaved in the American and Caribbean plantations, the first thing that happened almost automatically in all of them was the cutting off their linguistic connections to Africa. Whereas the Spanish planter, the Portuguese planter, the English planter, the Dutch, the French, their linguistic connections to Europe are left intact, right? But the African linguistic connection to the continent is cut off, And language is obviously the most important thing about memory. Language is really the keeper. Everybody's language is really the keeper of their memory.
Now we'll turn to Ngũgĩ Thiong'o's questions and see them again on Ngũgĩ on language. We've already seen the one on language, Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o on memory. And so now we'll turn to Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o on language. Just briefly again to catch up on a few of the things that are being discussed here.
If all languages, for me, are very wonderful human creations, human achievement, whether it's English, Gujarati, Swahili, Kikuyu, wonderful languages. But the problem has been in a system of oppression and aggression. The languages and cultures are seen as a hierarchy. Some languages say, oh, we are better than another. We are better than that language, or this culture is better than higher, not even better, higher. So it's in terms of hierarchy of power relationship between languages. That's what, but not language, a particular language per se.
Right, but the way,
Okay.
but I wondered,
Yeah.
Whether, that, as you know, the great African writer Chinua Achebe took a very different view. He suggested that it wasn't quite the case that you put, but also Ngozi Chimamanda Adichie, a younger Nigerian writer,
Right.
she says, English is my language. She's taken over English. And I just wondered whether your views of this were very much of that time, of the 50s and 60s.
Oh,
and the younger African writers take a different view.
English is not an African language, full stop. One can say we adapted and so on. In Nigeria, there's Yoruba, there's Igbo, in Kenya, there's Kikuyu, there's Luo.
Indeed.
We have genuine African languages.
But Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, just to quote her, she says,
right.
English is mine. I have taken ownership of English. So she's kind of decolonized herself in a different way, hasn't she?
She's part of the metaphysical empire. That's the whole point.
But she's still colonized.
No. Metaphysical empire is when people now begin to claim, this space is really, mine and so on. And that does not mean that what she does with English and what my son Mokomango does with English is wonderful. I've no doubt that's what they're doing with the English language, but they're contributing. But we should not deceive ourselves. When we do that, we are contributing to the expansion and deepening of English language, not Yoruba or Kikuyu or Kiswahili and so on.
But there's a couple of points to that.
We will now progress to the next point, which is I have prepared a couple of shock lessons for you who is in the seminar to try to figure out how to get things done. It's pretty straightforward. It's a shock lesson that teaches you a little bit of Swahili, how to count 1 to 10 in Swahili, and also how to greet someone. It's as simple as it can get. It's a delightful language. It doesn't have many complications at all. I hope you'll enjoy reading it. And so we'll have how to count 1 to 10 in Swahili and how to greet someone in Swahili.
Kujifunza nambari za Kiswahili.
Learn numbers of Swahili.
Mfano,
0,
1,
1,
2,
2,
3,
3,
4,
4,
5,
5,
6,
6,
7,
7,
8,
8,
9,
together drift 9,
10.
and 10.
Sufuri, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, nne tano sita saba nane tisa kumi ni ya mwisho. These are simple greetings in Swahili between two people. Hujambo. Sijambo. Habari gani? Nzuri sana. You can also add a name of a person. Hujambo Juma. Sijambo Amina. Habari gani? Nzuri sana.
Very well. So now I have the last section of this seminar is to give you a few assignments here and there for you to pursue, to read, to watch some things, and to respond to some assignments. The first one will be, what do you think of Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o's arguments and questions from the videos provided in this seminar? But also on YouTube, you just have to type Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o and you find him there with a lot of explanations and engagements and interviews about African languages. He is really, without a doubt, above everyone in Africa who has actually tried to do as much work as this and has gotten a very good reputation for it. And what do you think about the points he has? What world are we referring to when we talk about this? Then there is also the Asmara conference. I just showed you a piece of it. It is important that you could actually just go and see it yourself from beginning to end. It was a very long, well, not very long, but it was long discussions about details, and they were all being discussed, of course, in English, which was really strange. And it turns out also that it's actually a bank in Europe that actually funded the conference. So that is even yet another contradiction, but or maybe some interesting thing to look at. So we have made the Asmara Declaration. And then there are questions. One of them is like this: how do countries whose people speak many languages different from one another operate schools, hospitals, courtrooms, places of worship, conduct business, and many other things with so many barriers, with so many language barriers? Yes, ask yourself, how would Nigeria, having 400, 500 languages, conduct elections or even manage to deal with civil service as all citizens in all kinds of places, including the ones we mentioned here, schools? How are African children doing in schools when they're taught in non-mother tongue languages? We end up with quite a big concoction there, and it's a good thing for you to investigate. What would it be like? It sounds good to be able to do it in Rwanda and Somalia, if since they only have one language here and maybe another second one and so on. But when you get to 30, 40, I come from Kenya where they are upwards of in the middle 40s. Then there are others that are 100, like we have seen about Ethiopia, and Tanzania is 120. What are we? How do we live in countries like that, knowing very well we'd have to have to engage with each other for all kinds of transactions and reasons, including education, health, business ventures, and of course justice, which is the courtrooms where somebody is accused of, the plaintiff goes to court and they ask these people questions, and the one who is accusing the other is speaking a different language from the other. How do you deal with these things? There are many, many wonderful things to look at in terms of this language question, especially in everyday life. And then I want to give you a couple of readings just to start whetting your appetites on some things. And this is this conversation, this number 4 here, these conversations about how Swahili became Africa's most spoken language. It is very famous and popular, and it is growing by leaps and bounds. It's a language whose native speakers might not number a few tens of millions. I mean, maybe it's 10 million, 20 million. I don't remember how much it is by now. But can you imagine a language that is spoken by a small population like that? And then the people who speak Swahili themselves are now going towards a quarter, a third of a billion, and so on people. What happened to that language? How good were those small numbers to sell the language that way to everyone? There is a good story there to be told. And that's this is a good summary of it. You can actually see it in these conversations. All you have to do is look for the story of Swahili. That's what the book is called. And also, I would like to request that you read chapter 1 and 2 of the story of Swahili itself, the book, that we can also then discuss in class. It is available and free online. So all you have to do is go online to the Ohio University and go to this URL that is Ohio Open Library.ohio.edu, and you'll find the book there. It is free, it is open, it's but it will be digital, it will be PDF or some other kind of format like that. That will give you a sense of how this language that is the miracle of Africa, that has become this language spoken by so few, yet so many millions have taken on it. What is the story behind that? What can we learn about Africa's languages? I like to say that it is one of those languages that actually is an indictment of how the major languages of the world came to be where they are. And that is a long story that we would have to talk about, not entirely an indictment, but also the genius of some of them, like English. In East Africa, Julius Nyerere, very, very famous president, now deceased, of Tanzania, was known to say that Swahili, or English rather, not Swahili, English is the Swahili of the world. English is the Swahili of the world. What did that mean? Ask people you know, or look around and see what it is that you would find. That English is the Swahili of the world. How did that happen? It is because it is a language that grows in leaps and bounds and has lots of speakers, yet how does it grow like that? Or if you look at that and then compare it with the story of Swahili, maybe you'll see contrasts and divergences here and there, but also some issues there that tell us what makes a language the world an important language in the world. Is it just conquest and guns, germs, and steel, like it has been written, or is it some other place that that actually these things come from? And so that should be able to get us to be thinking about the kinds of things we'll be talking about. So all I ask is that you send me questions at the last point there, where I am mugane@g.edu.harvard.edu, where you can actually then send me any questions that you would have. Those of you who have listened to this, email them to this address, but I will likely answer them when I get to campus, or when we develop a place whereby we can connect and answer these things. So I thank you for your patience in actually waiting to look through and to listen to all this. I am definitely looking forward to also know the story of the Japanese language. I'm aware of it since I'm going to stop by there, and other languages as well. It's amazing what language stories tell us about where we've been and where we are headed. Looking forward, we will use this as a basis of our beginning of talking, and then we'll go to looking at Africa's languages from left and right, or from forwards and backwards, meaning we are standing in one point. How have they looked in the past, where we headed, especially looking at today's world where AI is becoming really quite a big thing, and what is it going to do to languages, not just Africa's, but everywhere. And but then our focus will be on Africa. So farewell, and I look forward to hearing from you, or even perhaps in meeting you one of these days. It's a pleasure indeed. Thank you.